guys, I'm back with the fifth video of the video series on Class 8 Science, Crop Production and Management. And in this video, we are going to learn about weed control, harvesting and storage. So, let's get started.
First of all, what are weeds? Well, weeds are some unwanted plants which are present in the field. Now, when our little friend went to the village, he had seen so many things in the green fields. He also saw, when he came across a wheat field, he saw that it was not only the wheat plants, but there were some other plants as well which were present there, here and there. So these kind of unnecessary plants which are present in the field, they are called weeds, and we do not want them to be present. So if you have your wheat field, the field should only have the wheat plants, but that is not the case, and that is how crop cultivation is done. So if you want to cultivate wheat, the entire field is full of wheat. But in between those wheat plants, you have some unwanted plants, like here you can see. So these unwanted plants are the weeds, and we do not want them to be there. So weeds are unwanted plants in the cultivated field. Now, interestingly, do you think that the farmer has sown seeds for these unwanted plants also, or the farmers planted these unwanted plants? No, not really. So these unwanted plants, they have a characteristic that they can just grow anywhere in any condition. So they tend to grow by themselves. It is not required that the farmers will have to sow their seeds and they'll have to water it. They just grow on their own. And that is how they come into picture. So the farmers will have to give enough attention to see if there are no weeds present in the field. However, weeds are very commonly found in the cultivated fields. So what can be done is how to protect our crops from the weeds, because we do not want the weeds to spoil our crops. Now, some of the examples of weeds are xanthium and parthenium. These are common examples of weeds. So this is how a xanthium weed looks like. Now, it is a picture which has been taken from front. So if you look at it from far away, it will be a small plant. Similarly, parthenium is another weed. Now, if you have never seen a weed, just go to your garden if you have one. Not even garden, even if you have plants in pots, in the mud pots, you will see that if you have a particular plant, say a rose plant, but from the soil you will see some small plants have come up with little leaflets and all. So they are unwanted plants. You never grew them, but they just came out on their own. And sometimes these plants tend to grow further and become as big as the original plant. So these are some examples of weeds. Now the question is, how do weeds affect the crops? Why are we so scared of weeds? Why do we want to get rid of them as soon as possible? How can they harm the crops? So let us see, how do weeds affect the crops? Now what happens is, when the weeds also start growing in the same space, it starts competing with the real crops for nutrients, space, water and light. So it becomes a kind of competitor. That is, the plant, that is our desired crop which we have planted there. So those crops and the weeds, they become competitor of each other. Both are fighting for the same nutrient, same space, same water and light. So the result is that, let us suppose if this is the weed and this is our crop, maybe the wheat crop or the rice crop or whichever. Now what do we want? We do not want even a share of the nutrients or space or light to get removed from the crops, because that is what we want. We have put in all our efforts to provide the best facilities to the crop. So now we don't want to lose anything to the weed, because weeds are something which are unwanted. We really don't want those plants. But still the weeds will be competing with the crops. Therefore, what will happen? The nutrients which would have been available to the crop had the weeds not been there, that would have been more. Now due to presence of the weeds, the amount of nutrients which will be available to the crop, or the space or the light, everything will get decreased, because some part of it will be taken in by the weeds, and that is how the weeds are growing, because the weeds are also growing. So that means it is taking up some nutrients, it is taking up some space. So the weeds are actually growing at the cost of our desired crop. So basically, the growth of the weeds are impacting or adversely impacting the productivity of our crops. So that is how weeds can affect the crops. Now sometimes it might happen that the weeds have grown so much that almost the amount of space occupied by our desired crops and the weeds are almost the same. So that will become a disaster situation. We really don't want that, because we have put in so much of effort to plow the field or to water the field, to provide manures, fertilizers, everything, just to make sure that the crops get the best nutrients, they get the best water, light and everything. But now instead of the crops, the weeds are taking some advantage out of it. So this is how weeds can affect the crops, and we don't want that to happen. So what do? We kill the weeds. So how do we kill the weeds? So for that we use the weed control techniques, and in this we use chemicals called weedicides. Like how we have insecticides to kill insects, pesticides to kill pests, similarly we have weedicides to kill weeds. So these are chemicals which kill weeds without damaging the crops. So that is interesting, that these chemicals are going to kill the weeds only, because the weeds and the crops, they are present very close to each other. So if we just use any chemical which can even be dangerous to the crop, so that is all the more risky for us. The weeds will get killed, but at the same time my crops are also getting killed, and I don't want that. So we have to apply certain chemicals which can kill only the weeds and not the crops. So these type of chemicals are called weedicides. And how do we apply these weedicides? These weedicides are not applied directly, because they are also some toxic materials. So they are mixed with water. So that's how it is diluted, and then it is sprayed with the help of some spray. So when you spray it, now it is the concentration of the chemical is less because it is mixed with water, and this spray will affect only the weeds. So only these weeds will get killed and nothing will happen to the crops. However, while applying these weedicides, it is extremely important. Now, since these chemicals are not something which are very useful, they are all harmful chemicals. It is just that they do not harm these crops. But these harmful chemicals should not be inhaled by any human being. So when the farmers apply these, they should make sure that they cover their nose so that they do not inhale these chemicals. Because if they inhale these chemicals, they might get some infection and they might fall ill because of the toxic substances getting inside their body. So that is one precaution that needs to be taken care while applying these weedicides to the fields. So harvesting is cutting of crops after it is mature. So this process is called harvesting. Now, why do we celebrate these festivals? What is so good? What is so good about cutting crops? Now that's because that so much of effort which was put in by the farmers for so long. First they prepared the soil by plowing and leveling, then they watered it, they irrigated the fields, they applied manures, fertilizers. They did so much, they have put in so much of labor, and this is the time when they get results of their efforts. So they get the crops. So now that the crops are mature, so what do? They cut the crops. So this is the time when they celebrate their happiness, because their hard work has given them results. Now the question is, what do we do once crops mature? Now as I said that we cut the crops, but how exactly do we cut the crops? Because when we say that we cut the crops, it is like a huge field full of crops. So cutting so much of crops is again going to be a tedious job. So do we do that manually, or we again have some equipment which help us in harvesting? So that is what we will see here in this section. Now, harvesting, as I said, brings a lot of happiness. That's because all their efforts, starting from watering the field, waiting for rain, praying God so that it rains, so that the field gets irrigated naturally, then plowing the field with tractors or sometimes even manually. So all these efforts which have been put by the farmers, they fetch results during the harvesting time, and that is why harvesting brings with itself a lot of happiness. And in different regions, people celebrate it in different ways. They give different names to these festivals, and that's how they celebrate their happiness. So now let us look at the tools which help in harvesting. Now here you can see a very common tool which is used manually by farmers to cut the crops. But if you want a machine kind of a thing which can actually automate the entire process, so that is also there. So at the bottom you can see the picture of a machine which helps in harvesting. So one tool is a simple sickle. So this is a sickle. It helps in manual harvesting of crops. So it has a sharp end here and a handle here. So the farmer can hold the handle and then the sharp edge can just cut it. Whereas the machine is harvester. So here you can just see the entire machine, and this machine helps in harvesting the crops. So here you can see the crops, right? But this side, very similar to this, you have a sharp edge here. So as the machine moves, so this sharp edge will continuously cut the crops. So manually you really don't need to move throughout the field and cut crops. So you just drive this machine, and by itself the harvester will do its job. So now this machine is often called as a combine harvester. Why? That's because this harvester not only helps in cutting crops, so it is called harvester because it helps in cutting crops. And why is it called combine harvester? That's because this combine also helps to separate the grains from the chaff. Now, only cutting will not help, right? Even if you cut the crops, so you are left with the grains as well as the chaff. So what is chaff? Chaff is you can say the covering of the grain. So if you would have ever seen the wheat grain or the rice grain, so you see a yellowish colored covering outside. So we do not need the covering, we just need the grain which is present inside. So after you cut the crops, you need to separate the grains from the chaff. So this separation is also done within this machine, and that is why it is called combine harvester. So let us understand the process of separation of grains and chaff, and then we will come back again to combine harvester. So this process is actually called threshing, where we separate the grain seeds from the chaff. So here you can see these are the grain seeds. So if you talk about rice, so these are the grain seeds which we normally eat. And what is this? These are the chaff. So they are like a thin covering on each of these grains. So each of these grain is covered by a chaff, but we are not interested in the chaff. We don't want it. So both of these need to be separated. Now when you cut the crop, you cut it somewhat like this. So when you cut it, you are actually cutting the chaff, and inside that you have the grain. Now after cutting, you need to separate it into these two parts. Now this process of separation of grain from chaff is called threshing. Now how do we do threshing? Because again, when you have quintals of crops, it is not an easy task to separate it manually. So we need some equipments which will help to make the process of threshing easier, and that is why we talked about the combine harvester. So let us quickly look at the various threshing methods which are used. Now, one common method which has been used since long time is winnowing. What happens in winnowing? It is a manual process, but here what happens is you have something like this. You would have seen this kind of a structure. So this kind of a plate kind of a structure is there where you put the mixture of grain and the chaff. Now what happens is when you actually blow it, when you move it up and down, the chaff, which is lighter because it is just the covering and it is very thin and light. So it is very light, and that is why it is easily blown away by the wind. So this is the chaff you can see here. Whereas the grain seeds which are heavier, they will not be blown away by the seeds. Instead, they will fall down here. So these are your grain seeds. So what you can do is gradually a heap will be formed by the grain seeds, and then you can collect the grain seeds from here. So this is one way of separating it, but it needs a lot of manual effort. You need people who can constantly move the plate so that the chaff and the grain get separated. Again, you need people's efforts to collect the entire grain which has been separated. So that means a lot of manual effort is involved, and also the process is relatively slower. That's because you have so huge amount to be separated. So even if you separate it like this, it is going to take a lot of time. So this is one traditional method of threshing. Now as I said, grains being heavier, they will fall back somewhat like this. So now the question is, this method is going to be tiring for the people because they will have to their hands will start aching, they will get tired standing there. So it's going to be a tedious job. So what should we do? So we should automate the process so that machine can take care of the separation process. And that is what is done in case of a combine. So combine is the name given to an automated machine, and it does harvesting as well as threshing. That is why sometimes it is also called as combine harvester. That's because harvester, it does harvesting, and combine means it also does threshing. Since it does both the things, so the name combine, that is a combination of threshing as well as harvesting. So that is a nice idea, right? The same machine will first cut the crops, and then inside the machine only the grains and the chaff will get separated. So let us see how exactly the combined harvester does both harvesting as well as threshing. So this is how the harvester looks like, where it will do harvesting, that is it will cut the crops. So here if you see at this end you have the crops. So these are the crops, and you see as it goes towards this side, as it moves this side, gradually the crops get cut. That's because the harvester is attached towards this end. So the headers, so this portion is termed as header. So different headers are used to cut different crops, because to cut different crops maybe different types of cutters are required. So for different crops different headers are used. So that is one thing. There is a rotating wheel which pushes the crop towards the cutters. Here you have a rotating wheel, and this wheel will push the crop towards this cutter, and as soon as the crop comes near the cutter, so the cutter will cut it. What are these cutters? These are nothing but sharp teeth-like structures. So you have teeth-like structures here. So these teeth-like structures will open and close, and that's how the crops will get cut. Okay, so that's about the cutting part. Now once the crops are being cut, then what happens? Then there is a threshing drum inside which will separate the grains from the chaff. So the threshing part is being taken care by a threshing drum. And where is the threshing drum? It is located inside. So the entire crop which is being cut, it passes on to the threshing drum. Then the drum will separate the grains from the chaff. Then the grain will then be collected in the grain tank. So in the threshing drum, what happens? Separation takes place. Now once it is separated, then the grains will get collected in the grain tanks. Now once the grain tanks have collected the grains, then what happens? Now what do we do with the chaff? Chaff is something which we don't want. So the grain tank is somewhere here maybe. So here you have the grain tank. Now what will happen to the chaff, which is the unwanted part? So the chaff will pass through the straw walker. So there is a straw walker here, and the unwanted straw will be thrown out from back of the machine. So from here the straw will be thrown out. This is the unwanted straw. This is the unwanted part. So you can see some certain things are coming out of it. So basically the unwanted straw or the unwanted chaff is thrown out from the back side. So from this side it will cut the crops. Inside there is a threshing drum which will separate the grain and the chaff, and then the grain will go to the grain tanks and the chaff will go to the straw walkers. So what happens? So once it separates, the grain goes to the grain tank and chaff goes to the straw walkers. And from straw walkers, it is disposed out through the back end. What happens when the grain tank is full? When the grain tank is full, it gets unloaded. So the grain tanks contain the grains and the straw walkers contain the chaff. So when it is full, then it gets unloaded and all the grains are taken out. So that is how a combine harvester works. So the grains get collected in grain tank and the unwanted chaff falls off the back of the machine. So this is faster. So our little friend is very happy with the combine harvester. So now he feels that yes, we can reduce a lot of effort of the farmers and we can save their time as well. Because now we just have one single machine which can do both harvesting as well as threshing. So towards the end of it, it will give you only the desired grain seeds. And that's all we wanted. So now there are a few points which need to be kept in mind while harvesting. So one is never burn the leftover on the field post harvesting. Now once harvesting is done, so you cut the crops, you get your desired seeds, but even after that there are some unwanted, maybe straw or chaff or something which is left over on the field, and many a times it has been observed that what farmers do is they just burn it to get rid of it. But have you ever imagined that what would happen if you burn them? First of all, it will cause air pollution. Secondly, when you burn it, there are chances that some desired other crops in the field might also get burned. So that means you can cause harm to other existing crops in the field. Now, since you are burning it, you are also spoiling the texture of the upper layer of the soil of that area. So, burning the leftovers on the field is not at all advisable, and it should never be done. Because it can cause pollution. So when you burn it on the field, it can also damage the existing crops in the field, because the field is huge and there are so many crops which are being cultivated in that field. So because of these reasons, burning of the leftover on the field. So what we do, we need to ensure while we think of storage. Now, have you ever wondered that when you have, let us suppose you have a box and you have a lot of eatables inside that box. So what will you prefer? Will you prefer to keep that box open, or will you prefer to close that box? Like, let us suppose inside you have some fruits, vegetables, or some other eatables, and so what will you like to do when you are storing these food materials? You would keep it open or you would keep it closed? You would keep it closed. Why? So that it do not get infected with some insects, or it shouldn't happen that some other animals came and they ate it up, or some microorganisms spoiled the food. So we do not want anything like that to happen, and that is why we tend to store it properly. And what do we mean by properly? We close it so that other insects or organisms or germs cannot enter inside the box, and that means our food items are all safe. In fact, for this basic reason itself, we tend to keep all sort of eatables, whether it is cooked food, raw food, spices, or anything. We keep everything covered to protect against insects or microbes or infection or contamination. So if you want, you can just go to your kitchen and have a look at the way things are kept in your kitchen. You will see that all the things in your kitchen, whether it is sugar or salt or spices or pulses or cereals, so everything is kept in jars. In fact, when your mom cooks something, the cooked food is also always covered with a lid. So everything is covered and everything is well stored in containers. That's because whatever is there in your kitchen, not everything is going to get consumed the same day. You are going to store it for a while, and then maybe you will consume it over a period of a couple of weeks or a period of couple of months. And that's how, like, most of us will bring grocery somewhat like this. Maybe today we purchase a grocery which is good enough to go for 1 month, because we do not want to come to the shop every day to buy stuffs. I mean, if you start buying things like this, that okay, today I buy rice, pulses, spices, salt, sugar, everything only for that day. So will you buy that small amount? No. So you buy it in a considerably good amount, and then that lasts for you for maybe a month or a couple of weeks. So that means you will have to store those materials properly so that it lasts for a couple of weeks or for a couple of months. And that is why storage plays a very important role. So we need to keep in mind that we have stored everything properly so that it is well protected against any sort of contamination. Now the question is, why is proper storage important? That's because we need protection against moisture, because if there is moisture, what is moisture? Moisture is nothing but presence of water. So when there is presence of water, it favors the growth of bacteria which can spoil food. So if there is a lot of water in any food item, it doesn't last long. And that is why you would have seen that when your mothers prepare pickle, so in pickle they tend to put a lot of lemon so that it has that sour thing, because lemon helps to preserve it for a longer time. At the same time, they do not put water, because when you put water allows the growth of bacteria which can spoil the food, so it will not be preserved for a very long period. So there should be no moisture at all, because these kind of spoilage bacteria, all they need is water and nutrients to multiply. So if there is no water, it is a little difficult for them to grow and spoil the food. So the first thing is moisture. So the next reason is protection against microorganisms. A lot of bacteria and fungi, they might attack the food items, or not only food items, the grain seeds or any other thing which we want to preserve. So from attack of microorganisms, because they can very easily spoil the food. Protection against insects, because they can contaminate the food. A lot of insects act as carrier of diseases. So they just transmit the infection from one organism to another. So that means these are the three major reasons against which the food item needs to be well protected, and that is why proper storage is very important. So how do we ensure storage of food grains? So food grains should be well dried before storage. Now why this is important? As I told you that moisture is something that can give rise to spoilage bacteria, and we do not want that. So before we store it, we have to dry it properly, because normally what happens is the fresh food grains, they contain a lot of water. So if we store it just like that, so water is already present there. So due to the presence of that water, microorganisms can grow. So bacteria can spoil the food. So before storing, it needs to be dried properly, so that there is no trace of moisture, and then we can store it either in metallic containers which is properly covered, so that it is not attacked by insects or any other microbes. We can also store them in jute bags and then cover them well. So these are some of the ways by which they are stored. Now storage of food grains is very important, because if it is not stored properly, firstly it might get attacked by insects or microbes. Now as a result of that, it might lose its germination capacity. Now if it loses its germination capacity, that means those seeds will not be able to give rise to a new plant. So if that becomes the case, then there is no point of having those seeds. And you already saw that how much of effort and time was required to produce these seeds. So this is the last step of the agricultural practice. So the entire process which was there. So that resulted, so these seeds are the result of this entire cultivation process. So if these seeds lose their germination capacity just because of bad storage, so that is really bad, because we are going to lose, or we are going to lose the entire effort and time just because of bad storage. So we need to ensure that it is stored properly, so that it can be utilized for later use. Sometimes at home, neem leaves are also used to store things, so that things do not get spoiled. That's because the neem leaves, you would have, if you have ever tasted the neem leaves, you will see that it has a bitter taste. That is because of the presence of some alkaloids which help to repel insects and pathogens. So those alkaloids, they do not attract insects and pathogens, they in fact repel them. So insects and pathogens do not attack the food item which contains neem leaves. So overall in this lesson, we spoke about the entire process of crop production and management, and it all started with preparation of soil, where we prepared the soil for growing crops by plowing it, by leveling it, and then we sow the seeds, that is we scattered the seeds on the prepared soil. Then we added manures and fertilizers to provide enough nutrients for better growth of the plant. Then we irrigated the field, that is we provided enough water so that plants get sufficient water for their growth. And then we applied weedicides to protect the crops from the effects of the weeds. And finally came the harvesting, where once the crops become mature, they are cut, and followed by threshing, where the grains get separated from chaff. And finally a proper storage of the food grains, so that they do not get attacked by insects or microbes. So this is all that we have studied in this entire lesson, and I hope that my little friend is convinced enough with the understanding of crop production and management, and now he would be able to understand that whatever he saw in the village is extremely beneficial for all of us.
I hope this video was useful, and in the next video we are going to do something very important, because by now in the last 5 videos of this video series we have covered all the concepts of crop production and management. So our next video is all about questions, and you know they are very important because the more you practice questions, the better your concepts are. So be with us for the next video.